Crackdown in Hong Kong. A 90-year-old cardinal, a pop star and a lawyer are the latest to be arrested under the national security law. Condemnation and calls for an investigation. Israel and Palestinian authorities provide conflicting accounts of the death of an Al Jazeera journalist. Heading for the peak. A new record for daily infection numbers in Taiwan and new rules for counting COVID cases. Plus, it's International Nurses Day. At a time when Taiwan is fighting its biggest outbreak yet, we speak to the health workers that are on the front lines. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. National Security Police in Hong Kong have arrested the trustees of a disbanded charity which supported protesters, including a 90-year-old former Catholic bishop. One of the 612 Humanitarian Relief Fund trustees, scholar Hoi Bo-kyung, was arrested at Hong Kong Airport, where he attempted to fly to Europe for a conference. 3 others were then rounded up by police on suspicion of colluding with foreign forces. Among those detained are Hong Kong Canadian pop star Denise Ho, barrister and veteran lawmaker Margaret Ng, and 90-year-old Cardinal Zen, the former Catholic head of Hong Kong. All have been released on bail with their passports confiscated. The 612 Humanitarian Relief Fund was named after the date an estimated 2 million Hong Kongers protested the government in 2019. It raised money to cover protesters' legal and medical fees. The fund was forced to disband by National Security Police last year. Samuel Chu is the founder of US-based advocacy group, the Campaign for Hong Kong. He's the son of the Reverend Yu Ming, co-founder of one of Hong Kong's biggest peaceful protest movements, Occupy Central. Our reporter Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick asked him why the 612 Fund was in the crosshairs of the national security law.
This goes deeper than just individuals being arrested. They are attacking a very fundamental right on 2 levels. One is the fund itself as a civil society group that has already been disbanded under threat, and then their trustees are now arrested. But the mission of the group was to provide defense in court, which is another fundamental right that is now being completely eroded and eliminated. They are claiming that somehow there are foreign forces or that members of this board of trustees traveled overseas and somehow colluded with foreign forces. But really, all of those things are just hiding really the true intent, which is to send a message to anybody who remains in Hong Kong who would dare to exercise their freedom of speech or have done so in the past. They're going to come for you as retribution.
One of the arrestees last night includes Cardinal Zen, a 90-year-old former bishop of Hong Kong. It might seem strange, but he's far from the first man of faith to be targeted by the Hong Kong authorities. So why is it that they seem to have this target on their back?
Cardinal Zen has always been an outspoken supporter of democracy and human rights in Hong Kong and in the mainland. And I think that has made him sort of a thorn in the side of Beijing for many years. And so there's, I think, an element here of retribution for past dissent and offense against the Beijing government and the Hong Kong government. But even broader than that, as you have said, is that religious communities, and this is not limited to the Catholic Church, to Christians, but you see this in the Muslim community and in the minority, in the mainland, in the Tibet regions, and the Falun Gong community. Part of what makes Beijing's authoritarian regime work is the control of the truth. Cardinal Zen is a close family friend. My father has marched alongside him for many decades now. He showed up at every court proceedings that he could physically attend and have been there every step of the way as a spiritual guide and shepherd along this movement. And so he represents, I think, much more than just the church. But I think that what we are seeing now today is a retribution of what he has represented for Hong Kong in the past.
This latest round of arrests was apparently triggered by Professor Hui trying to travel outside of Hong Kong for a conference in Europe. And this follows widespread fears about Hong Kong immigration authorities maintaining a list of Hong Kongers that they won't allow to leave the territory. So what do you think? Does this confirm those fears?
This reveals and confirms some of our suspicion that there is indeed a list that the Hong Kong government is keeping, because our suspicion is that what triggered the group of arrests was the attempt by Hui Peng Keng to leave Hong Kong. That reveals for us is that there is a list of people that they're monitoring, and that when they attempt to leave, they are flagged. And when he was arrested, that triggered, I think, the arrest of the other trustees so that their passport and travel documents would be confiscated. That also adds to the alarming status right now in Hong Kong of just knowing that people might not be able to leave and travel freely from Hong Kong if they are on the list of the government watch list.
Here in Taiwan, a locally based Hong Kong civic group has denounced the arrests. Hong Kong Outlanders, which was founded by Hong Kongers in Taiwan, condemned the authoritarian crackdown in the territory. Since the imposition of the national security law in Hong Kong in 2020, there has been an increase in residents emigrating abroad. Almost 13,000 Hong Kongers were granted residency in Taiwan last year. Hong Kong Outlanders and other local civic groups called for more support for people arrested by Hong Kong police, including human rights activists and other protesters.
中国的态度，中国的本性是非常清楚的，在国际尤其是在民主自由的阵营这边，他们没有任何模糊的这一种可能性。尤其从他们这一连串以及未来可能可以预期到他们对香港持续要做出来的行动，所以我想，同样的，在这样子的前提之下，台湾也没有犹疑的本钱，台湾必须坚定的跟国际社会站在一起，支持香港。
The Czech Republic's Senate has voted to back Taiwan's participation in international agencies such as the World Health Organization and Interpol. The vote comes ahead of the World Health Assembly in Geneva later this month. It is the second year in a row that the Czech Senate has called Taiwan's inclusion before the WHO's annual meeting. Taiwan has been sidelined since 2017 due to opposition from China. The motion was led by Senator Pavel Fischer, who leads an international parliamentary group that seeks to change how democratic countries deal with Beijing. He tweeted that China has nothing that can block international cooperation. Leaders from the European Union pledged to take a, quote, more active role in the Indo-Pacific during a Tokyo summit with Japan's Prime Minister. In her speech, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, cited tensions in the East and South China Sea, as well as the threat posed by North Korea. She also thanked Japan for its support of sanctions against Russia over the war in Ukraine. In a statement following the summit, the two sides further pledged to deepen exchanges on China, especially on the issues of human rights, Hong Kong and Xinjiang. Ukraine says its military has pushed back Russian forces in the country's east. Days after counter-offensives in the Donbas region, Ukrainian forces on Wednesday were reportedly just kilometers from the Russian border. Ukraine's deputy defense minister has claimed victory in the first stage of the war. It's 11 weeks since Russia invaded. The UK has agreed mutual security deals with Sweden and Finland. The pacts mean that the UK will come to the aid of the two countries if they are attacked, and vice versa. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, visited both countries on Wednesday to sign the deals, which come 2.5 months after Russia invaded Ukraine. Sweden and Finland are also poised to join the NATO security bloc in the wake of Russia's war in Ukraine. Tributes for Shireen Abu Akleh continue to pour in from around the world. The United Nations is calling for an independent probe into the death of the veteran Al Jazeera journalist. She was killed covering an Israeli raid in the West Bank. Her official funeral will be held today at the Palestinian presidency headquarters. Al Jazeera has called the death of the Palestinian-American reporter blatant murder and says it holds the Israeli government responsible. James Chater reports.
Draped in the Palestinian flag, the body of Shireen Abu Akleh is carried through the streets of Ramallah in the Palestinian territories. The longtime Al Jazeera journalist killed covering the story she dedicated her life to.
وخبر فاجع هي صدمة لا يمكن استيعابها حتى الآن. شيرين الزميلة الصحفية المهنية الراقية تتلقى هذه الرصاصات المتعمدة من قبل الاحتلال الإسرائيلي. هي بدمائها سطرت رسالة يجب أن تكون رسالة جادة ووقفة جادة من جميع الجهات المختصة بالعالم لحماية الصحفي الفلسطيني.
51-year-old Abu Akleh was killed covering an Israeli raid on the city of Jenin in the northern West Bank. Shot in the head, despite wearing a vest identifying her as a journalist. A Palestinian Christian, Abu Akleh was a household name in the Palestinian community, having spent more than 2 decades covering the Palestinian conflict with Israel. In Jerusalem, where Abu Akleh was born, her death has sparked widespread protest. Palestinian authorities have said the killing is an Israeli assassination and are calling for an international investigation.
We don't want to get into the details, but we want international to mean that we reject the claims of Israel that they can do a credible investigation. They are the criminals, and the criminals cannot investigate themselves.
But Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said the exact reason for Abu Akleh's death had not yet been determined and alleged that Palestinians may be responsible.
על פי הנתונים הראשוניים שבידינו, ישנו סיכוי לא מבוטל שהעיתונאית נפגעה בכלל מירי הפלסטינים החמושים. אך על מנת להגיע לחקר האמת, אנחנו צריכים לקיים חקירה אמיתית. והפלסטינים בשלב הזה מונעים את זה.
The US representative to the UN also called for an independent investigation into Abu Akleh's death, who also held American citizenship.
Our highest priority is the protection of American citizens and the protection of journalists. It is so important that journalists be allowed to do their jobs without fear. And so our message, again, is let's get to the bottom of this. Let's ensure this never happens again.
For those Abu Akleh leaves behind, grief and frustration. And on the beaches of Gaza, a sand sculpture outlining her name. A fleeting memorial, but a testament that the journalist's legacy will not soon be forgotten. Damon Lin and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
To find out more about the situation for journalists in the Palestinian territories, our reporter James Chater spoke to international news correspondent Nicole Johnston. Nicole was with Al Jazeera for more than 10 years and spent a year in Gaza covering the region. She's a former colleague of Shireen Abu Akleh.
Well, clearly she was a legend at Al Jazeera and a legend in the region. She'd been living and working in the West Bank. She was from Jerusalem. She lived and breathed the story. She was a dedicated journalist. So this, of course, has come as, you know, a huge shock, not only to Al Jazeera colleagues and former colleagues like myself, but sort of that entire fraternity of journalists who work in the Middle East or who've been in the region.
And we've seen really remarkable pictures coming out of the West Bank in the aftermath of her death. You know, hundreds of Palestinians gathered outside Al Jazeera's bureau there. Can you explain a little bit about, you know, why Shireen was such a well-respected and revered figure amongst Palestinians themselves?
Well, journalism in general has quite a high regard among Palestinians. You know, they're an educated population, they're very media savvy, especially the younger people, and they know really that through the media and journalism, it's been the only way that they've been able to get their story out. Any big story you turned on Al Jazeera Arabic, there was Shireen along with her colleagues. You know, she did the big stories, but she also did those sort of incredible human interest people stories that you see all over Israel, Palestine. So she was very much at the forefront of, you know, breaking news, but also there telling the stories of families, of women, of children, for example, locked up in Israeli prisons, the entire sort of military system that people are living under in the West Bank. And you hear that sort of many younger journalists had grown up watching Shireen and really wanting to be like her.
And you worked for a while as an Al Jazeera correspondent in Gaza. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you faced carrying out your job in the region?
The case of what we've seen with Shireen, while I was, obviously shocked and outraged, the sad reality is I wasn't that surprised by what had happened, because you see that happening all the times. When I was in Gaza and I lived in the Gaza Strip for 12 months, there were many occasions where you'd be reporting on certain stories inside Gaza and there would be Israeli fire coming from the borders. And I'm not talking about just in a war situation, and I was in Gaza for 2 wars. I'm talking about just a normal day, really. I remember one of the first stories I did in Gaza, and it was probably a bit naive of me in hindsight. We went into the buffer zone. This is Palestinian land, but it's under sort of Israeli fire zone. We went in with farmers who were trying to farm their land. We had on our press jackets and flak jackets. And I really didn't think that the Israeli military would fire on us, because there was quite a large contingent of journalists accompanying the farmers. But we were on that Palestinian land, and within 5 minutes, we were coming under Israeli fire.
The United States Senate has voted 51-49 against a bill to guarantee the right to abortion access across the country. The vote follows last week's leaked Supreme Court document that it's likely to reverse a 50-year-old ruling that granted women nationwide access to abortion. Senate Democrats had pushed to codify abortion rights into federal law, but the bill fell short of the 60 votes needed. All Republican senators voted against it, along with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Taiwan's COVID-19 wave hit a new high on Thursday, with 65,446 new cases confirmed. As numbers mount, the government's introduced new rules to keep the medical system from overloading. Starting Thursday, anyone undergoing home isolation, home quarantine or self-health management will be added to the daily tally of new cases if they get a positive rapid test result. But they will need a follow-up with a virtual doctor to get the result confirmed. And with rapid tests hard to come by, Taiwan has started letting people import up to 100 tests for personal use. But those looking to make a profit should be warned, anyone caught reselling them could be subject to a fine of around $34,000 US. Former Vice President Sun Chien-run will again represent Taiwan at the second annual Global COVID-19 Summit on Thursday. Chien will give a pre-recorded speech at the summit, pledging that Taiwan will donate $1.5 million US for global vaccine coverage. Chien says that Taiwan will also continue to provide medical masks, PCR testing machines and other supplies to countries in need. The summit is co-hosted by the US this year. The focus is on global efforts to end the pandemic and preparing for future variants.
The Taiwan model is an example of how a modern democracy can work transparently using technology to fight the pandemic. We will continue to cooperate with our democratic partners to share this experience with the international community.
May 12th is International Nurses Day, commemorating nurses around the world who have played a critical role on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. With Taiwan fighting its biggest outbreak yet, our reporter Bing Wang spoke to the nurses about how they are coping.
Nurses in Taiwan have some of the longest hours and lowest pay, and for the last 2 years, they've been on the front lines of the COVID pandemic. Wu Mengping has worked in healthcare for the last 30 years. As a chief nurse in one of Taiwan's largest hospitals, Wu said they'd never been so overworked as during the second COVID-19 outbreak in May 2021, when vaccination rates were almost zero and hospitals were full.
所以我当时也觉得这个人力 其实是非常吃紧，而且也非常需要的。当时其实是感觉每一分每一秒都是非常非常的紧凑哦。那人力的这个资源都是要立即到位的哦，所以当时让我感受是最深的。
There are over 300,000 people in Taiwan with nursing licenses, but only half are practicing nurses. Many have left the profession because of the work conditions and long hours. Surveys by the National Nurses Union reveal that nurses can tend up to 20 patients in just one shift, which is double the health department's recommended ratio of 8 to 10 patients to one nurse. With Taiwan now seeing its sharpest rise in COVID cases, there's additional strain on the country's nurses, who also face increasing exposure to the virus. Ji Soo-jing, the chair of Taiwan Nurses Union, has been fighting for higher wages and better resources for the country's nurses.
现在疫情期间，我看每个人大概都是要超过10到12小时。你8个小时是下不了班的啦，所以时间就变长。但是这个都不能算加班费哦，因为他工作没做完啊。好，有可能啦。
Aside from the long hours, many nurses also have to deal with being mistreated by patients.
那有些时候可能到了急诊室，他就有时候心情不好就会咆哮，那对护理人员态度就不是那么的友善。
According to the Nurses Union, all these factors contribute to a decline in nurse recruitment.
药师的薪水可以到53000呢，他们又不是第一线。你看那个语言治疗师，都比我们还高哎。我们24小时照顾病人，我们的薪水才4万多。
More than just a profession, both Wu and Ji feel that nursing is a vocation, that it takes love and dedication to care for the sick. But they also feel it's only just that nurses too get the benefits and the recognition they deserve. Kama Xu, Pichi Zhuang, and Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus.
Police are investigating the death of a rare Formosan black bear in central Taiwan. The bear had been wearing a satellite tracking collar. Signal emitted from the collar was lost last week, prompting a 3-day search. The bear's body was found buried in a wooded area on Monday, with the tracking device removed, leading investigators to suspect human involvement. The bear had a history of entering farms and orchards and taking food, and hunters operated in the area its body was found in. The Formosan black bear is an endangered species and protected under Taiwanese law. Conservationists believe only a few hundred may remain in the wild. Police have appealed for anyone with information about the bear's death to come forward. We take you now to Kaohsiung's Shousan Zoo in southern Taiwan to meet a veteran zookeeper. From handling African lions to looking after giant tortoises, here's the story of his life with the animals.
我叫陈广宏，今年38岁，从事保育员这个工作已经有20多年了。最早期我是在屏科大的野生动物收容中心工作，主要是针对是救伤，然后当然就是像是收容的，就是查气的之类的。当初会从事保育员的工作，当然是对动物有兴趣啦。最主要做保育员这个工作呢，除了就是日常的清洁跟观察之外，当然我们就是还会想一些环境布置之类的东西，让他们一些食物啊，或者是生活一些多样性的一些方式，就是让他们在狭小的空间里面有更多丰富的生活。园长就是跟我们讲说，那个要麻烦你来照顾狮子的时候，我心里觉得不会吧，大型猛兽。到了时候，我进到笼舍里面，前辈就是会先带我逛一下环境嘛。那当然走的时候，他们就已经习惯了，可能就走过去没事嘛。我就走过去的时候，突然就狮子就那个震撼感。连我的心脏都会跳，都会被震动。照顾狮子的困难点，可能就是在与它的接触，因为毕竟像我们想要跟它近距离接触的时候，它可能还是对你会有所陌生、有所警戒。 要跟它可能做一些互动的时候，并没有这么的容易。在观察方面，我们可能就会有所困难，可能没办法注意太多。那可能等他注意到的时候，有可能他的状况就会很严重。那我们尽量是在照顾方面的话，我们是尽可能的去避免受伤，因为动物的造成的伤害，事实上有时候往往你不注意都很严重。动物园上面我们给予的教育层面的意义还蛮大的，它没有像我之前在收容中心工作里面，我们只要单纯负责像跟动物之间的照顾互动这样子。有时候也会看到很多人说咧动物园啊，对动物这样啊歹，无就把动物放出去，就让伊回归野外野生。那事实上这有很多层面问题，并没有像大家可能想这么简单。因为第一，这些动物，它们是不是野生的？我们虽然都俗称它们是野生动物，但是对我来讲，它们就是圈养的动物。那假设说今天你把它放去野外，对他们来讲，事实上不见得是好的。再来就是在户外，他们都有一些像是盗猎者的存在。那事实上，这些动物到了野外之后，真的会开心，真的会快乐吗？这些都会去影响到他们原有的生态。对我而言，我会觉得是说，这些动物在我们动物园，我觉得还算蛮幸运的。我觉得我们已经开始有不一样的认知跟照顾的方式，让他们就是有不一样的生活。
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Finally, today, we'll leave you with images of the famous Japanese pop artist Takashi Murakami's latest exhibition in New York. The artist marks a dive into the world of NFTs. For more stories from around Taiwan and the world, please download the TaiwanPlus app. Stay safe and see you next time.